Hello there everyone, it's Nina. Thanks for joining me today for another video. Today I have two cards to share with you using a brand new stamp set from Simon Says Stamp's Sweet Wishes collection, and this stamp set is called Heartfelt Snowflakes. This is a beautiful stamp set and I'm really excited to be using it today because my mom actually illustrated this set. My mom is a graphic artist just like me, and she is very talented, as you can see. She created this lovely, elegant snowflake set that I am so excited to use. So I'm going to be using the stamp and the coordinating die set today to make the two cards that you've seen on screen. We're going to start first with this really colorful one. Both of these cards use Inky Techniques, so I'll share both of the techniques with you today and walk you through how we created the cards. So as I said, I'm going to be using the Heartfelt Snowflakes stamp set, which is a 6x8 set, and I'm going to also use the coordinating dies, which I have here. I'm going to pair up some distress inks to do a bit of ink smushing. I have all of the colors you see here on screen, which are Picked Raspberry, Wilted Violet, Salvage Patina, Abandoned Coral, and Squeezed Lemonade. All of these colors are going to work together to create a beautiful, colorful background, and I just love doing ink smushing with distress inks. So I'm picking out the inks one at a time and pressing them onto a clear pocket from Simon Says Stamp. This is a storage pocket for stamps, but it's a really great carrier sheet for applying ink onto your paper. Now the paper I like to use for my ink smushing is smooth, and it's Canson XL Bristol paper. It takes ink beautifully, it reacts well with the inks and water, so you get that really cool reactive effect with the distress inks, but it's also smooth, which I really like. In between each of these layers, I'm drying them, so that way I don't have the inks react too much with each other. I'm not drying this perfectly, but just enough so that I maintain the separation of color a little bit. I do want some spots to blend, so I will allow some of this paper to still be wet in certain areas. I really love the carrier sheet method because it allows me to be more strategic with my placement of the inks. There are different ways that you can do the ink smushing technique. One of them includes putting the ink directly onto your work surface and then laying your paper face down into that ink. But I don't really like that technique personally because I like to be able to see where I'm placing the ink. And that technique is a little too unexpected for me. So by having the carrier sheet, it allows me to place the ink a little bit more carefully on my paper and get a more controlled look. And the inks will react differently depending on how much water you spray onto that ink and carrier sheet. So if you put a lot of water down, it'll water down the ink a little bit. And if you put less water down, it'll give you those really nice droplets of ink. Now I'm taking some distress sprayer and flicking on a bit of water to create that water spot effect. Distress inks reactivate with water, so that allows you to lift ink and get really cool texture results like this. I just love how this turned out. I always like to come back in though with a little bit of ink blending after I do my ink smushing, just to change up the colors a little bit and maybe add a little bit more darker areas, maybe soften some of that smushing a little bit. So I brought in those exact same colors that I used for the ink smushing, and I'm blending those on mostly around the corners and the edges, just so that way I can maintain that lighter center. I purposely put the yellow in the center to maintain a brighter inner area. And again, before I finish this up, I am going to splatter it with a bit more water just to lift off some of that ink and continue that texture. So now that we have our background created, I will add a few more embellishments with some more ink. I brought in a distress spray stain in Wilted Violet, and I'm going to splatter that onto my background. And then I also brought in an oxide spray. Oxide sprays are opaque versus the distress spray stain, which is translucent. So the bright teal color will still show up on the top of this background, which looks so cool. So that's the oxide spray, allowing me to get that really nice bright teal splatter. Now that my background is completely dry, I dried this really well with my heat tool and then let it sit for a while before I brought in my stamps to do some stamping. And I am prepping the surface of my paper with a powder tool prior to that stamping, so that way I get as clean of an impression as possible. I'm using embossing ink to stamp my images, which is this large snowflake image from the Heartfelt Snowflakes stamp set. I'm covering that image with some white powder so that I can get these two opposite snowflakes on either corner of my card, and that's going to create a really nice background for the focal point that I'll be placing on top of my shaker, which is how we're going to finish off this card. Before I get to that though, I did want to add a bit more stamping using some of the smaller stamps. And for my stamping, because I want something nice and clean and even, I'm going to use Pawsitively saturated inks instead of distress inks. Distress inks don't stamp quite as nicely as a standard dye ink, or in this case, this is a hybrid ink from Simon Says Stamp. But this ink is going to stamp beautifully and super smooth. I did pick out colors that were really close to the colors that I used in my background. So I have Peony and also Galaxy. Those looked really nice together, and because they are slightly slower in their dry time, I do have time to sprinkle on some embossing glaze. So this is picked raspberry embossing glaze, and I'm sprinkling it on top of those smaller snowflakes that we just stamped. That ink is going to pick up that embossing powder, and then we can go ahead and emboss these. These are just going to add a nice little glaze to the snowflakes and give them a bit more shine, which will go nicely with the white snowflakes that we have on the corners. So now I'm going to bring in some white splatter from Dina Wakley, and I'm going to splatter this on top of my background. I love this splatter because it does not react with other inks that are underneath it. So even these distress inks aren't reactivating when this splatter goes on top, so it's going to stay nice and white. So here's where I'm turning this into an edge-to-edge shaker card. If you've watched my videos before, you know I love making these, and you probably could follow along in your sleep with this. But I'm going to go ahead and walk you through the steps just in case you're new to this. So I'm going to cover the edges of the back side of my paper with Terrific tape. And I'm going to peel off the release paper on 3 of those sides, not the 4th edge, because that's going to be our opening to pour in some sequins. This piece of plastic, it could be stamp packaging, or you can also buy clear bags that work really well for shaker pockets like this, but either one is a great option for you to wrap around your card panel. So just make it slightly larger than your card panel. Then we can go ahead and in that open area, fill it with a bunch of sequins. So I picked out different things that I had in my stash, and I don't even know if all of these sequins are still available because I have a giant sequin collection and I'm trying to use them all up. So I have things I think that are pretty old, but I loved how these worked. And so I encourage you to just dig through your stash and find what you have to create a similar effect. So I filled it with 3 different types of sequins, and it is pretty chock full. And I folded that last edge of the plastic over the panel into that exposed adhesive on the backside to close everything up. Now I can trim off any excess on the corners and shake it all up to get this really awesome shaker card. I'm putting this onto an A2 card from Simon Says Stamp. So as you can see, my snowflake panel is a little bit smaller than an A2 card, so it trims up the edges nicely. So my shaker is ready for some embellishment, so I'm going to go ahead and stamp another one of those large snowflakes. This time though on some vellum. I wanted to have a snowflake kind of floating in the middle of my shaker, and I thought vellum would be a great way to achieve that. So I've prepped the surface of my vellum with a little bit of a powder tool prior to stamping. I realized I had my stamp kind of misaligned, but it worked out here. So I'm going to stamp this onto the vellum, and then using some white embossing powder, same as what I did for the interior panel of my card, I'm going to use that white embossing powder to emboss the snowflake. Then I can take my heat tool and melt this. I'm very careful when I melt embossing powder on vellum. I try to keep the heat gun moving, and I heat it up well prior to bringing it to the vellum, just to make sure I don't warp it. Then with the coordinating die, which just fits, I barely made that work, I'm going to go ahead and cut this out. These coordinating dies cut beautifully around the detailed areas of the snowflakes, so you get a really intricate cut. And I'm hiding some foam tape on the back side of the snowflake, kind of putting those little foam squares in the areas where it's solid and you can't see through. And then that way I can go ahead and pop this up right into the center of my card, a little more closer to the top than the bottom, so that way I have room to put my greeting. So this looks really cool floating on top of our shaker. And I'm going to embellish that snowflake with a few of these dazzling gems from Simon Says Stamp. There are brand new dazzling gems to the collection from Simon, and that includes gold, a prism color, opal, so many pretty options. I have them linked below in the video description for you to check out. And by the way, the sentiments in this stamp set, the Heartfelt Snowflakes stamp set, they are so delicate and intricate. They're so pretty. I'm going to stamp this word Christmas onto some dark purple cardstock. And then again, I used white embossing powder to emboss the greeting. But check out the detail and the fine lines. It's so pretty. So this is going to get cut out with the coordinating dies. And these are such intricate stamps that there are some areas of the die that is a little hard to see through. So I encourage you to line up the die in the center first and then just check the 2 edges to make sure you're happy with the placement. And it cuts beautifully. Look at how fine and detailed this is around the edge of the stamp. I'm going to pair my Christmas greeting with a sentiment strip from Simon Says Stamp. I could have used one of the smaller sentiments in the stamp set, but I wanted a particular greeting, and so I wanted to be able to pull out a sentiment strip set to be able to achieve that. I'm stacking a few more of these Christmas die cuts that I simply just die cut from the same purple cardstock. So that way I can go ahead and place these behind my sentiment and get a stacked appearance. I wanted this to be slightly dimensional off of the card, but it's so thin, I wouldn't be able to put foam tape behind it very easily. So by doing the stacked greeting effect, that's going to give me that perfect dimension without having to deal with foam tape. And then I also took my little sentiment strip, cut off the excess word of Christmas off of it, so that way I could stack this above, and that's going to finish off the greeting. How fun is this shaker? All of the sparkly sequins inside look so cool, offset by that dramatic background, and those snowflakes just pop off of the page. So this is card number 1, and this is a very inky technique. I'm going to now do some simple stamping. So just something different for you to see how you can use this stamp set in a whole nother way. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out some Pawsitively saturated inks from Simon Says Stamp. I have Heather, Twilight, Orchid, and Tidepool. This is a really pretty color palette for winter, so you could use this exact same card design and layout. Just swap out the greetings. Instead of saying season's greetings, you could use this as a birthday card. I did pair a few more of the sentiments from the stamp set as well to my greetings to create a stacked effect, which we'll get to in a few minutes. So what I'm doing first is I'm stamping onto my card panel, which is slightly smaller than an A2 card. I have it attached to my craft tacky mat from Simon Says Stamp, which is fantastic for holding your paper in place while you're working inside of a MISTI tool, or you can use it outside of a MISTI too. You can stick it to your desk and your work surface, and it holds beautifully, and then it holds your paper in place while you're stamping. I'm picking out different snowflakes from the stamp set. I think I almost used all of them here. And I'm just randomly stamping them across my paper with those 4 shades of ink to create a scattered effect. And I just love how this turned out. I tried to balance the colors a little bit so I didn't have the same colors next to each other. And then I also brought in some of the really tiny stamps and a clear block, and I very carefully stamped those onto the card panel as well, in between the larger ones. And this stamp set is so detailed. Even those teeny tiny snowflakes stamped beautifully and super crisp. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and emboss the edges of my paper. I love doing this because it gives my paper a little bit of a frame, but I don't have to worry about trying to cut some cardstock down. So I'm just going to take my embossing ink pad and carefully press this against the edges of my cardstock on around all 4 sides, and then I will take my embossing powder and then just dunk that paper into it. And in this case, I'm using silver embossing powder from Simon Says Stamp. I thought the silver would go really nicely with these soft, wintry colors. And so this is going to give me that really nice edge. Then I'll just take my heat tool and set this so that way the embossing powder is melted and it gives me that super pretty shiny edge. This is a great trick if you want to get the metallic look without having to deal with cardstock. I'm going to then also bring in those same colors of ink in only Heather and Tidepool though this time. And I'm going to ink blend around the sides of my paper, mostly focused on the left and bottom. This is just going to soften the paper just a little bit. I felt like it was so harsh with the bright white, and it needed a little bit more color and something to soften the edges. So that's where bringing in the ink blending and just carefully adding a light touch to the edges of the paper gave me a really nice finish. I wanted to add a bit of shimmer because with snowflakes, I just have to have some sparkle. So I brought in some shimmer mist from Brutus Monroe, and I'm tapping this onto my paper to create some splatter. The shimmer is beautiful. It goes really nicely with the snowy, frosty finish. And in addition to this, I'm also going to do some stenciling. I'm going to pull out this stencil set. This is from an ornament stencil set from Simon. It came out like last year, and it's a really great stencil set for layering and creating some custom ornaments, but it had this really great star panel in it. And I'm going to use that to create just a few stars around the snowflakes to create almost like a sparkle burst. And using some glitter paste in a clear finish, this is going to allow me to just place a few of those around my background just to give it a little bit of sparkle. So this is very subtle and it really doesn't show up that well on camera, but in real life, it just looks so pretty as it catches the light. The photos at the end here, you'll be able to see it a lot better. So here I decided to add some ribbon. Now I wasn't sure what ribbon I was going to use, and eventually I decided not to use this particular ribbon, but I had to leave the clip in here because Oscar wanted to help me. So as I was working with the ribbon and trying to figure out what I wanted to do for this, he's in here, of course, wanting to play with it. So he was having a good old time. He thinks it's fun to play with ribbon, as most cats do. And so here's a cute little picture of him sniffing the ribbon and probably telling me that I need to pick something else because he wasn't happy with it. So I thought it needed to be something else too. So I picked out, instead of a solid ribbon, a sheer ribbon. It's got a slight teal color to it. It's from Studio Light. It's a really pretty ribbon. And I just liked how this was a lot softer and it didn't distract from the snowflakes. So I'm going to go ahead and trim off any excess that's hanging off the sides. And then I can layer this onto a dark blue card base that I made from some soft navy cardstock. Now I'm going to work on my greetings. So I picked out the peace, love, and joy sentiments, and I'm going to stamp these on 3 different colors of cardstock. I want to create a stacked effect here, and I also wanted to pull in more of those colors that I used for the background. So this is going to allow me to do that. So I'm going to stamp each of these greetings on a different color of cardstock. I did prep the surface of the paper with my Simon Says Stamp powder tool prior to stamping. Again, we're using the same embossing ink that I've been using for all of my embossing. And I will also use that same white embossing powder. So once I've gone ahead and stamped and embossed all of these little greetings, then I can go ahead and die cut them. I use the coordinating dies to cut these greetings out. And in addition, I'm also going to cut out a small sentiment strip. This one, I want to say season's greetings at the end of this sentiment. So it'll say peace, love, joy, season's greetings. I also want to create that stacked effect here for my sentiments, just so they have a little bit of dimension off of the card. So I'm going to die cut each of the greetings with the coordinating dies from some of those same colors of cardstock, and then just stack the plain ones behind my embossed greetings. For all of my glue here, the liquid glue that I'm using Simon Says Stamp Craft Tacky Glue. It's my favorite because not only does it hold really well, but it also dries clear. So if I have any glue that's kind of squishing out the sides, I won't ever see it on the finished project, which I find super invaluable. So I'm just carefully placing these in the center of my card, trying to line these up as evenly as possible, trying to keep the same space between each of the words. And then that is going to finish off this card. There you can see the sparkle a little bit more as I turn this in the light. The beautiful little star sparkles are so pretty, and they add the perfect finishing touch to this beautiful card. It's soft and elegant, and I just love how these snowflakes stamped and created 2 very different card projects. So as you can see, using some different inky techniques, you can create completely different results with the same stamp set, which I think is a really great illustration of how you can use the same products over and over again to create different looks. So I hope you were inspired with the cards that I shared today using this brand new Heartfelt Snowflakes stamp and coordinating die set from Simon Says Stamp's Sweet Wishes release. I have the link to the release down in the video description and on my blog for you to check out if you're curious about what else is in this collection. It's great for the holidays. And I will have another video coming up very soon here for the blog hop for the Sweet Wishes collection. So I'm going to be participating in Saturday's blog hop, so I hope you'll join me for that and see some more card ideas using some of the other products in this release. So thank you so much, friends, for stopping by and spending time with me today. I will be back very soon, of course, to share more with you all. So until then, have a wonderful day.